12 years of drawing maps for the military is not worth a single contract I close at the golf club. Sign the paper, Evelyn, and leave the land to someone who actually knows how to turn dirt into real money. Gavin set the thick, heavy manila folder on the polished oak dining table at exactly 8:17 on a cold, rainy Thursday night. He didn't stand up from his padded leather chair to greet me when the front door opened. He didn't offer to take my heavy, waterlogged uniform coat, nor did he ask if my flight back from the Middle East had been smooth. I had been back inside my own home, the house I had paid the mortgage on for nearly a decade using my military hazard pay for less than 40 minutes. My heavy canvas sea bag was still sitting directly beside the front entryway, slowly dripping dark rainwater onto the polished hardwood floor planks. It smelled faintly of aviation fuel, damp canvas, industrial hydraulic fluid, diesel exhaust, and the stale recirculated air of a C-17 military transport plane. Gavin had squared the sharp corners of that yellow folder against the woven fabric placemat with an obsessive, rehearsed precision. It was the kind of neatness men use when they have spent consecutive weeks rationalizing a fundamental betrayal in their heads and need the physical environment to feel controlled, neat and undeniable. Beside him sat Clara Mercer. She was holding a heavy crystal tumbler containing 2 fingers of my 12-year-old single malt scotch, the bottle my father had given me when I received my commission in the Civil Engineer Corps. She was slowly swirling the amber liquid with a measured, practiced rhythm that made the ice cubes clinksy softly against the heavy glass walls. She wore a tailored cream silk blouse, her dark hair pinned back with invisible tortoiseshell clips, and she looked at me across the table not with hostility, hatred or anger, but with the cold, completely detached eyes of a corporate liquidator inspecting a distressed asset that was about to be officially written off a company ledger. I did not scream. I did not drop my heavy brass truck keys onto the granite kitchen island. I did not allow my shoulders to sag even a fraction of an inch under the weight of my wet uniform jacket. 14 years as an officer in the United States Navy Civil Engineer Corps teaches a person many hard, unforgiving things. You learn how to read structural blueprints under blackout curtains while mortar shells shake the ground beneath your boots. You learn how to measure soil density with your bare hands, how to calculate concrete curing times in sub-zero mountain winds, and how to command teams of construction battalion Seabees who expect you to be sharper, tougher, and calmer than anyone else in the perimeter. But perhaps the most useful operational lesson it instills is how to keep your resting heart rate at 60 beats per minute while the structural framework of the room around you catches fire. When you take a direct, unexpected hit, you do not engage in emotional theater. You do not cry. You do not raise your voice. And you do not negotiate from a position of instability. You immediately assess the active threat. You measure the structural load damage to your position. You calculate the precise risk of secondary structural collapse, and you quietly locate your primary and secondary tactical exit points. I looked at the table between us. The manila folder was thick, packed with at least 30 pages of legally drafted property division documents, financial waivers, and land transfer deeds. The paper had been tabbed with color-coded sticky notes, marking every line where my signature was required. "You've been planning this for a while," I said. My voice was completely flat, free of trembling, carrying the low, measured tone I used when delivering structural hazard briefings to base commanders. Gavin leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. He tried to look relaxed, but I could see the subtle muscle twitch near his right jawline. "It wasn't a snap decision, Evelyn. We haven't been a real married couple in 3 years. You're gone 5 months out of the year, living in tents and military bases. And when you do come home, you act like you're still commanding a battalion. You don't know how to be a wife to a man who operates in the real world." Clara took a slow sip of my father's scotch, set the glass down on a coaster, and chimed in with a smooth, practiced voice. "From a financial perspective, Evelyn, this is the cleanest break for both of you. Gavin needs liquidity for his development projects. And your military career doesn't align with the kind of high-level real estate network we're building in Northern Virginia. The settlement leaves you with your pension, your personal bank accounts, and your vehicle. You walk away clean without lingering debt." I listened to her speech without interrupting. It was fascinating to watch two people who believed they held every single card in the deck. They had rehearsed this scene. They had sat at this exact table while I was 6,000 miles away, going over the talking points, anticipating where I would break, predicting where I would shout, and preparing counter-arguments for every objection I might make. I reached deep into my wet uniform coat pocket and pulled out my father's old steel vernier caliper. I felt the cold, silver notch of the precision instrument against the pad of my right thumb, a familiar, grounding piece of metal that had belonged to a man who spent 40 years building bridges that never gave way under stress. I set the caliper down gently, deliberately, on top of the 30-page property settlement agreement. I looked down at the signature line, marked with a bright yellow sticky tab that Clara had placed there. I looked at Gavin's jawline, locked tightly in that stubborn, defensive angle he always adopted right before asking his father for a personal loan to cover another failed financial gamble. Then I uncapped my dark blue ink pen, leaned forward over the oak table, and signed my full legal name without a single hesitation on every required line. Gavin blinked in genuine surprise. Clara paused her crystal glass mid-air, the amber scotch sloshing slightly against the rim. They had braced themselves for an explosive confrontation. They had spent the entire afternoon preparing for tears, for screaming, for an active duty officer using her military rank and moral authority to lecture them about loyalty, personal sacrifice, and 14 years of shared history. They wanted a fight because an emotional fight would have handed them a convenient excuse to feel justified in their betrayal. They wanted me to act like a victim so they could label me unstable. Instead, I handed them complete, absolute, and suffocating silence. I capped the pen, set it neatly beside the folder, and picked up my father's steel caliper, slipping it back into my pocket. "Did you remember to feed the dog?" I asked quietly, looking directly at Gavin. Gavin stared at me, his mouth slightly open, completely thrown off balance by the question. "What, no?" "I left him in the yard." "He doesn't like thunderstorms," I said, my voice steady. "I'll take him with me." What they did not know, what neither of them, despite all their business degrees and commercial real estate arrogance, could possibly comprehend was that the 12-acre parcel in Fauquier County, Virginia, was not a hidden gold mine waiting to be unlocked by greedy private developers. It was a legal, financial, and regulatory landmine buried beneath years of federal procedure. And 4 months ago, while sitting in a windowless, classified vault inside the Defense Logistics Agency headquarters at Fort Belvoir, I had personally stamped the red clearance seal that froze that exact geographic coordinate under Defense Restricted Asset Zone Level 1 permanently. They genuinely believed they were robbing a quiet, unsuspecting woman of her retirement nest egg. In reality, with 2 strokes of a pen, they had just officially tied their names to a massive federal trap that was already beginning to snap shut. My name is Evelyn Vance. I am 37 years old, and for the past 12 years, I have served as a major in the United States Navy Civil Engineer Corps, attached primarily to the Defense Logistics Agency and various expeditionary construction battalions. To my extended family, to my former in-laws, and to the man I had been married to for 9 long, increasingly isolated years, my military career was an invisible, unglamorous ghost. When I was deployed to Bagram Airfield in the mountains of Afghanistan, or when I was attached to Task Force 5-6 in the relentless heat of Bahrain, Gavin told his golf partners and wealthy real estate clients that his wife was doing administrative paperwork in an air-conditioned command tent. When I came home from a rotation with thick, black grease permanently settled under my fingernails, steel-toed combat boots hopelessly stained with fine red clay, and the skin on my shoulders peeling from extreme desert sun exposure, he would look at me with a mixture of pity and mild embarrassment. He would frequently ask why I could not simply resign my commission and transfer my engineering degree to a respectable, high-paying corporate consulting firm in Washington, exactly like the husbands of his commercial real estate partners had done. He called me a paper pusher. He called my structural engineering assessments dry, useless military homework that brought home a remarkably modest government paycheck while he spent his days chasing elusive 6-figure commissions in the fiercely competitive commercial real estate market of Northern Virginia. I actively allowed him to believe that smaller, diminished version of me. In the military, particularly when you hold a top-secret sensitive compartmented information clearance, explaining the actual, granular nature of your daily operational work sounds like arrogant posturing to a civilian. Furthermore, constantly correcting a deeply insecure spouse feels like extending an open invitation to an endless, exhausting argument. So I kept my mouth tightly shut. I let him believe that I was just a quiet, unambitious woman who liked practical geometry, wore faded utility uniforms because she had no sense of high fashion, and spent far too many waking hours staring blankly at topographic contour lines and soil density charts. When we originally purchased the 12-acre property in Fauquier County back in the spring of 2018, it was nothing more than rolling, overgrown brush, a collapsed timber barn that had surrendered to rot, and an old gravel driveway that was completely washed out by the spring floods every single year. I bought that raw land using my accumulated disability back pay from an artillery concussive injury I sustained during an operation near Kandahar, combined with 8 years of tightly guarded sea pay. Every single dollar that went into purchasing that land came directly from my physical sweat, the permanent ringing in my left ear, my aching joints, and hundreds of sleepless nights spent lying on narrow, unforgiving steel cots under the vibrating hum of industrial diesel generator exhaust. Gavin's name was put on the property deed right alongside mine because I fundamentally believed in the old-fashioned, sacred idea of a joint home. I genuinely thought that a marriage was a tactical phalanx where two people stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing the heavy shield, protecting each other from the outside world. I believed that holding back assets meant holding back trust. But while I was stationed overseas calculating maximum load stress for tactical supply runways and designing heavy logistics depots capable of surviving mortar impacts, Gavin was steadily losing money. He was an independent commercial real estate broker, the exact kind of man who bought $3,000 Italian suits on high-interest credit cards just to project an aura of success at country club luncheons. He believed that looking wealthy was the primary prerequisite to actually becoming wealthy. By the late winter of 2025, his reckless bad trades in speculative technology stocks and a series of disastrously failed residential property flips had buried him alive in $240,000 of private, high-interest debt. He didn't tell me about the financial bleeding. He didn't ask for my analytical advice. He didn't ask if we could sit down at the kitchen table and restructure a household budget together. Instead of facing reality, he met Clara Mercer at a regional land development seminar in downtown Richmond. Clara was a private financial consultant who specialized in finding distressed rural properties and quietly flipping them to aggressive offshore investment syndicates for fast, massive capital gains. Clara did not build anything of lasting value. She simply moved paper around and extracted capital from the panic of others. When she looked at Gavin, she immediately recognized the desperate scent of a man drowning in undisclosed debt, masked entirely by an expensive suit and a fragile ego. Clara looked at my 12 acres of undeveloped land situated near the new highway expansion corridor and saw an incredibly easy kill. She had been listening to unverified, highly speculative industry rumors whispering that the County Board of Supervisors was planning to quietly rezone the surrounding agricultural valley for a massive, multi-billion-dollar commercial data center park. If those rumors actually materialized into approved commercial zoning permits, that 12-acre plot of overgrown weeds and collapsed timber would exponentially jump from its modest $300,000 agricultural appraisal to nearly $4 million essentially overnight. All Gavin and Clara needed to do was figure out a way to get the quiet, compliant Navy woman entirely out of the legal picture before the county board officially voted on the zoning variance. So, while I was standing in the Persian Gulf analyzing soil compaction ratios for heavy ammunition storage bunkers under 110-degree heat, Gavin and Clara were sitting in air-conditioned comfort, meeting with a high-priced, aggressive divorce attorney in Richmond. They drafted a comprehensive full property settlement agreement that gave Gavin sole legal ownership and unencumbered title of the Fauquier land. In exchange, the contract generously waived his legal claim on my modest Navy retirement pension and my reliable, 7-year-old Ford pickup truck. They deliberately dangled the legal protection of my military pension in front of me like a grand, generous gift. thoroughly believing that I would blindly grab it out of a desperate fear of losing my hard-earned retirement. They truly thought they had outsmarted the quiet military paper pusher. What Gavin completely failed to understand, what his profound lack of military knowledge and utter disrespect for my profession completely blinded him to, was how the United States federal government actually goes about acquiring and securing land for critical national defense infrastructure. Rumors of massive commercial data centers do not happen in a regional market vacuum. Frequently, the Department of Defense uses loud, plausible commercial development rumors as an active, deliberate cover story. This psychological tactic is designed to prevent rampant land speculation and keep civilian property prices completely stable while federal land acquisition officers quietly evaluate critical communications corridors in the background. 4 months before I returned home from my deployment, a classified operational directive marked Priority Alpha arrived on my secure, encrypted terminal in Northern Virginia. The Department of the Navy was actively expanding the secure perimeter and the underground fiber optic cabling grid for the highly classified Regional Satellite Communications Array located in Fauquier County. My specialized engineering team was tasked with conducting the primary environmental impact study, performing deep soil resistivity testing, and drawing the exact boundary survey for a location designated as Coordinate X-ray 44. Coordinate X-ray 44 was my 12 acres. Under the strict provisions of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, specifically Section 252, any private property designated under a Level 1 Defense Restricted Zone is immediately placed under an absolute, classified federal freeze. No commercial development permits can be issued by any local or county officials. No land subdivisions can be recorded with the county clerk. No permanent structures of any kind can be built on the surface or dug into the ground. And most importantly, any deliberate attempt to solicit private investment capital, collect equity, or leverage bank loans against the land using false or speculative commercial zoning expectations automatically constitutes severe federal wire fraud and active defense procurement sabotage. I sat alone in my secure, windowless vault office late one evening in February, staring silently at the high-resolution topographic map of my own property projected on the glowing monitor. The digital system showed the bright red perimeter restriction box sitting directly over the exact location of our old, collapsed wooden barn. I knew the rules. I could have filed an immediate conflict of interest disclosure with my commanding officer, removing myself from the project. I could have picked up my encrypted satellite phone, called Gavin, and warned him that the data center rumor he was undoubtedly hearing was a complete ghost. I could have told him it was a carefully constructed mirage designed by military intelligence to keep greedy commercial developers looking the wrong way, while the Pentagon finalized a ruthless eminent domain seizure. I picked up the heavy black receiver of the secure phone that night. I dialed our home landline number, listening to the static hum of the international connection. Gavin answered, but Clara was right there in the background. I could hear her distinct. Musical laughter echoing off the kitchen walls as she talked about securing a champagne reservation at a high-end, exclusive steakhouse in Georgetown for that coming weekend. When Gavin finally took the receiver and realized it was me, his tone immediately shifted to a flat, inconvenienced sigh. He didn't ask if my deployment flight through Ramstein Air Base had been safe. He didn't ask if the constant ringing in my ears from the artillery blast was getting any worse. He didn't ask if I was sleeping at all. Instead, he hurriedly asked if I had remembered to digitally sign the federal tax extension form he had emailed me, emphasizing that he desperately needed my signature so he could claim the maximum home office deduction on his Schedule C business filings. He sounded annoyed that my being in a combat zone was delaying his accounting paperwork. I sat there in the silent, humming Server Vault, listening to the man I had pledged my life to prioritize a tax deduction over my physical survival, all while his mistress laughed in my kitchen. I gently set the heavy receiver back down on its cradle, ending the call without saying a single word of warning. There are people in this world who possess the humility to learn from gentle warnings. And there are people who only learn the laws of physics when the concrete retaining wall meets their windshield at 70 miles an hour. Gavin had spent 9 consecutive years telling me my engineering judgment was useless, dry, uninspired, and completely devoid of vision. It was finally time to step out of his way, secure my own perimeter, and let him test the strength of his own vision. The 6 weeks following the cold, rainy night I signed those divorce papers were a masterclass in aggressive, unchecked arrogance. Gavin moved Clara into our former 4-bedroom suburban home within 72 hours of my departure. I packed 2 canvas duffel bags, my father's vintage hand tools, and my official Navy survey equipment into the bed of my Ford F-150, and moved into a small, furnished basement apartment 3 miles outside the main security gate of Naval Support Activity Quantico. I did not hire a high-priced, aggressive civilian divorce attorney to contest the property division or demand half the house. Instead, I retained Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne, a brilliant, cold-eyed JAG officer who specialized in federal administrative law, government contract disputes, and property acquisition encumbrances. When Marcus reviewed the draft settlement agreement that Gavin's Richmond attorney had sent over, he raised an eyebrow over his gold-rimmed reading glasses and let out a soft, dry whistle. "Evelyn," Marcus said, leaning back in his leather swivel chair and tapping a heavy Mont Blanc pen against the wooden armrest. "Your ex-husband's legal team included an unusually aggressive, sweeping indemnity clause. Paragraph 14 explicitly states that the transferee, Gavin Vance, assumes 100% of all financial, tax, environmental, and regulatory liabilities associated with the Fauquier property from the exact minute of execution. Furthermore, he explicitly waived his legal right to audit, inspect, or contest any pending federal encumbrances, easements, or clouding of the title. He drafted that paragraph himself," I said, setting my father's steel vernier caliper on the corner of his desk. "He wanted to make sure I couldn't come back 2 years from now and claim a percentage of the commercial data center millions he thinks are going to flood his bank account." Marcus smiled a cold, sharp curve of his lips that contained zero human warmth. He signed his own financial death warrant in paragraph 14. "If this land gets locked down by a federal taking, he cannot claim in a civil court that you concealed a material defect or acted in bad faith. He legally swore under penalty of perjury that he conducted his own independent, professional due diligence. Let him keep the contract exactly as written," I told him. "Do not change a single comma, semicolon, or period." While the circuit court quietly processed the uncontested divorce decree, Gavin and Clara went to work with feverish, reckless speed. Driven by his crushing $240,000 private debt and Clara's insatiable hunger for a career-making development deal, Gavin did not even wait for the deed transfer to be officially recorded with the county clerk's office. He used the signed, notarized settlement agreement as primary collateral to secure an emergency, hard money bridge loan from a high-yield private equity firm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. The bridge loan was for $1,800,000, carrying a predatory interest rate of 14% and a mandatory 6-month payoff window. Clara used her financial consulting network to convince 6 of her wealthiest private clients to invest another $700,000 of their personal retirement funds into a newly formed legal entity called Vance Prime Holdings, LLC. They used that initial capital injection to pay off Gavin's pressing stock margin debts, lease 2 brand-new European luxury SUVs, and hire an expensive architecture firm in Washington, D.C. to draw up glossy, 3-dimensional renderings of a multi-story commercial tech park complete with artificial lakes, glass walkways, and outdoor dining plazas. They printed embossed marketing brochures on heavy cream cardstock. They hosted an exclusive private dinner party at a historic country club in Middleburg, pouring vintage European wine for local politicians, county board members, and wealthy land speculators, showing off architectural blueprints for a multi-million-dollar project built entirely on land they did not legally or structurally control. I watched every single step of their elaborate circus unfold directly from my secure terminal at the Defense Logistics Agency. In mid-March, Gavin sent me an unsolicited text message. It was a high-resolution photograph of him and Clara standing on the highest ridge of my old property, wearing matching leather jackets and holding crystal champagne flutes next to a newly erected wooden sign that read, "Future Home of Vance Innovation Park Phase 1. Hope your modest military pension covers your monthly rent in that basement," he wrote underneath the picture. Real financial vision turns raw dirt into generational wealth, Evelyn. You should have stayed in the kitchen where you belong. I stared at the photograph on my phone screen for a long time. I zoomed in on the background behind their smiling, champagne-flushed faces. I noticed the bright yellow surveyor stakes they had driven deep into the earth near the tree line. They had placed those commercial boundary stakes directly over the primary access easement for the Navy's underground fiber optic trunk line that connected the regional satellite array directly to the Pentagon network. I did not reply to his text message. I took a high-resolution screenshot, saved it to an encrypted military drive, and forwarded it directly to the Office of the Naval Inspector General and the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, attaching the master coordinate file for Project X-Ray 44. Under federal law, driving unauthorized commercial construction markers into an active military utility easement is a Class B federal misdemeanor. But when performed while actively soliciting private investment capital under fraudulent zoning claims on a national defense asset, it triggers an immediate, mandatory fraud investigation by the Department of Defense. 2 weeks later, the Pentagon officially finalized the land acquisition package. The Secretary of the Navy signed Executive Order 14,022. The entire 12-acre parcel was officially annexed under federal eminent domain for national security infrastructure. The federal land appraiser set the compensation value based strictly on raw, undeveloped agricultural use before any commercial data center rumors existed, $42,000 total. And under the national security emergency provisions of Executive Order 14,022, that modest payout was immediately frozen in a federal escrow account pending a mandatory background check and financial audit of all listed title holders. Gavin's hard money bridge loan of $1,800,000 was due in less than 60 days. The private equity firm in Charlotte was charging $800 a day in late payment penalties. And the land he had pledged as his sole collateral was now officially valued at $42,000, locked inside a federal vault that no civil court or bankruptcy judge in the United States could ever touch. The tactical trap was fully sprung, and Gavin had laid every single brick with his own hands. The climax of Gavin's elaborate illusion did not happen in a dramatic, shouting courtroom battle. It happened on a bright, crisp Tuesday morning in the floor-to-ceiling glass conference room of Vance Commercial Properties in downtown Leesburg. Gavin had organized a formal signing ceremony to celebrate the official launch of his commercial development company. He had invited his major equity investors, 2 regional bank vice presidents, a county supervisor, and a staff reporter from the Northern Virginia Business Journal to witness the execution of his first commercial development syndicate. I knew the exact operational timeline because Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne and 2 senior special agents from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service were standing in the carpeted hallway directly outside his glass doors at 9:15 a.m. I was there too. I wore my dark blue service dress uniform. My leather shoes shined to a mirror finish, my major gold oak leaf rank insignia pinned sharp, level and flawless on my collar. I stood quietly near the back wall of the hallway, holding a slim leather briefing folder under my left arm. Through the clear glass partition, I watched Gavin standing at the head of a massive mahogany conference table, wearing a tailored 3-piece navy suit, gesturing animatedly toward a large, 3-dimensional architectural model of his tech park. Clara sat directly beside him, wearing a crisp white silk blouse and a gold watch, handing out leather-bound investment prospectuses to the seated investors. "Gentlemen," Gavin's voice carried clearly through the glass door as he raised a heavy gold pen into the air. "Today we secure the commercial future of Fauquier County. This 12-acre parcel represents the single highest-yielding commercial development asset in Northern Virginia." He lowered the nib of his pen toward the signature line of the master syndicate contract. Before the gold nib could touch the paper, the heavy glass door was pushed open. Senior Special Agent David Vance of the Defense Criminal Investigative Service walked calmly into the room, followed by Special Agent Sarah Lynn from the FBI Financial Crimes Task Force and 2 uniformed Federal Protective Service officers. Gavin stopped mid-motion. His confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly reassembled the polished, persuasive salesman smile he had used on me for 9 long years. Agents, Gavin said, stepping forward with an outstretched hand and an easy chuckle. If this is regarding the routine security boundary check for the nearby communications tower, my office handles all federal inquiries through our legal counsel in Richmond. Special Agent Vance did not take his hand. He placed a thick, blue-bordered legal document directly on top of the three-dimensional architectural model, crushing the small plastic trees of the miniature tech park beneath its weight. Gavin Vance, Agent Vance said, his voice flat, loud and entirely devoid of human emotion. I am serving you with an official federal notice of frozen title, asset seizure, and criminal injunction under Title 10 and Title 18 of the United States Code. Gavin let out a short, nervous laugh, looking around the table at his guests for support. You have the wrong address or the wrong file, Agent. This is private commercial property. We are executing a $30 million development closing today. Special Agent Vance flipped open the blue folder. As of 6 o'clock this morning, the real property designated as Fauquier County Parcel 094, coordinate X-ray 44, has been officially condemned, seized and annexed under Executive Order 14,022 for National Defense Infrastructure. All commercial development permits issued by county authorities are voided. Any physical entry onto this site is a federal trespass offense. The conference room went dead, suffocatingly silent. I watched Clara's face first. The color did not simply leave her cheeks. It evaporated as if drained by an industrial pump. She dropped her leather prospectus, the heavy paper hitting the polished hardwood floor with a loud, slapping thud that made the bank vice president jump out of his seat. Gavin stood frozen, his gold pen still hovering 2 inches above the contract. That is legally impossible, he stammered, his face turning a blotchy, mottled red, his eyes darting frantically toward his investors, who were already pushing their chairs back from the table. My ex-wife. My ex-wife signed a full property waiver. I hold sole title. The land is worth $4 million. The official federal appraisal for agricultural land acquisition under Executive Order 14,022 is $42,000. Special Agent Lynn interjected, stepping forward with a tablet computer. And because your entity, Vance Prime Holdings, solicited and accepted $1,800,000 in high-yield private debt and $700,000 in investor equity using falsified zoning claims on a classified military reserve. All corporate and personal bank accounts associated with this project have been frozen under federal wire fraud statutes. Gavin's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the mahogany table with both hands to keep from collapsing directly onto the floor. That was the exact moment his desperate, scanning eyes drifted past the federal agents and caught me standing in the doorway. He stared at my uniform. He stared at the sharp gold oak leaves on my collar. He looked at the leather briefing folder under my arm, the exact same official folder format used by the Navy Civil Engineer Corps for structural land condemnation procedures. Evelyn, he whispered, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic squeak that sounded nothing like the confident man at the dining table. What is this? Tell them. Tell them you made an administrative error on the coordinate survey map. I stepped into the conference room slowly, my heels clicking methodically against the hardwood floor in the dead silence. The room parted for me. Investors, bankers, and lawyers backed away toward the floor-to-soiling windows as if I were carrying an unexploded ordnance. I did not raise my voice. I did not smile. I did not show a single flicker of triumph or anger. I looked at Gavin with the same cold, dispassionate evaluation I used when inspecting a cracked load-bearing concrete beam. I didn't make an administrative error. Gavin, I said, my voice steady, clear and carrying into every corner of the room. You told me 12 years of drawing maps for the military wasn't worth a single contract at your golf club. But you forgot one fundamental engineering rule. I set my leather briefing folder gently on the mahogany table right next to his useless, crushed architectural blueprints. I don't just draw maps, I said softly. I establish the legal and structural boundaries that the United States military owns. You wanted the land. You insisted on paragraph 14. You signed the indemnity clause. Now you own $42,000 worth of frozen dirt and $2 million worth of personal federal debt. Gavin sank back into his leather executive chair like a man whose bones had turned to dust. His face was the exact color of wet chalk. His hands were shaking so violently he could not put the cap back on his gold pen. Clara did not look at him once. She grabbed her designer handbag, pushed her chair back, and tried to walk quietly toward the glass exit, only to be stopped at the door by Agent Lin, who calmly informed her that she was required to accompany them to the federal building for formal questioning. I turned on my heel, adjusted the lapels of my service dress coat, and walked out of the conference room into the bright, crisp Virginia morning. There is a strange, profound, and almost holy quiet that arrives after a long, toxic structure finally collapses under its own accumulated weight. For 9 long years, I lived in a marriage where my profession was minimized. My intellect was treated as an inconvenient handicap, and my quiet discipline was mistaken for weakness and compliance. I spent years keeping my face completely still while my chest was burning, convincing myself that staying silent and keeping my head down was the necessary price of maintaining peace in a home. I was wrong. Silence is not a doormat you lay down so arrogant people can walk over you without making noise. Silence is a tactical perimeter. It is the boundary you hold while you assemble your facts, measure the structural load capacity of your life, and wait for the cold truth to enforce itself without your help. 3 weeks after the federal raid on Gavin's office, I received a heavy wooden crate in the mail at my new rented house near Quantico. It was an old military storage box from my father's estate that had been sitting in the dusty attic of my former home. Gavin had dropped it off on my front porch in the middle of the night without knocking or leaving a note. Inside the box, resting underneath my father's faded service medals from his 2 tours in Vietnam, was a folded piece of yellowed notebook paper. It was a letter my father had written to me on the day I commissioned as an ensign in the Navy Civil Engineer Corps. Evelyn, the letter read, in his sharp, slanted handwriting that I knew so well. Loud men build thin, impressive walls because they desperately want everyone to stand outside and applaud them. Quiet men build deep, unseen foundations because they know the storm is eventually coming. Never rebuild a wall for someone who deliberately tried to tear down your foundation. I sat on my front porch in the cool evening air, holding that piece of paper, feeling the weight of his words settle permanently into my bones. Gavin lost everything he had built on appearance. His commercial real estate broker license was suspended indefinitely by the state licensing board, pending the outcome of the federal fraud investigation. The hard money lenders in Charlotte seized his European luxury vehicles, placed a lien on his personal bank accounts, and foreclosed on his remaining assets. His investor group filed a joint civil lawsuit against him and Clara for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, forcing him to sell his deceased parents' retirement cabin at a total loss just to cover his initial retainer fees for a criminal defense attorney. He called my personal cell phone 4 times in late May. I did not answer. He sent 3 long, rambling emails pleading for a meeting. I marked them as spam and deleted them. On a rainy Thursday evening in early June, exactly 3 months to the day after I had signed those divorce papers at his dining table, I heard the sound of heavy boots on my front wooden steps. I opened the door. Gavin was standing on my porch in the freezing drizzle. He wasn't wearing his $3,000 Italian suit or his polished shoes. He wore a faded canvas work jacket. His hair was unkempt and thinning, and his eyes had the hollow, terrified look of a man who had spent 90 days realizing he was the sole architect of his own ruin. "Evelyn," he said, his voice trembling against the cold rain. "Please. I just need 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes." I didn't invite him inside my home. I stood firmly on the threshold, my hands resting naturally behind my back in the parade rest position I had maintained for 14 years in uniform. "Why didn't you tell me?" he choked out, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes as his shoulders shook. "You knew about the federal restriction zone. You sat at that table, watched me sign those papers, and you let me walk straight into a $2 million federal disaster. If you had just said one word, one single sentence, none of this would have happened to my life." I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The anger that I had carried in my chest for 9 years was completely gone. There was no joy in seeing him broken on my porch, but there was no pity either. There was only the cold, clear, unyielding reality of a completed mathematical equation. "Gavin," I said, keeping my voice level, quiet and firm. "If I had told you the truth that night at the table, would you have believed me? Or would you have laughed, patted my hand, and told me I was just a paranoid, jealous paper pusher who didn't understand high finance and commercial real estate?" He opened his mouth to speak, to offer an excuse, but no sound came out. The absolute truth hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He knew the answer. If I had warned him, he would have accused me of trying to sabotage his dream out of bitterness. He would have pushed harder, lied faster, borrowed more money, and fallen even worse. "You didn't listen to my voice for 9 years, I said softly. "You only listened to the sound of your own ambition and Clara's flattery. I didn't set a trap for you, Gavin. I simply stopped standing between you and the wall you were so determined to build." He dropped his head, his chest heaving as he stood in the rain. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for a second chance. He turned around slowly, his wet shoes squeaking against the wet wood of the porch, and walked down my gravel driveway into the dark. I stepped back inside, closed the heavy oak door, and turned the deadbolt lock into place. A full year has passed since that rainy morning in Leesburg. A human life does not rebuild itself with dramatic background music or sudden, miraculous turnarounds. It rebuilds itself one quiet, deliberate choice at a time, like pouring reinforced concrete into a freshly engineered mold. This spring, I was officially promoted to the rank of commander in the United States Navy Civil Engineer Corps. The promotion ceremony was held at the historic Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. There were no news reporters, no glossy brochures, no $3,000 suits, and no country club celebrations. My engineering team was there, 24 decorated officers and enlisted Seabees who knew exactly what my work, my discipline, and my leadership were worth. My commanding officer pinned the silver oak leaves onto my collar, shook my hand firmly, and said 4 words that meant more to me than 9 years of marriage ever had. "Outstanding work, Commander Vance." I bought a small, historic stone farmhouse on 3 acres of land outside Warrenton. It has thick field stone walls, a tin roof that hums softly when it rains, and a timber workshop in the back where I keep my father's tools and my survey equipment. Every wall, every beam, and every window was chosen by me, paid for by my own earned salary, and is completely free from debt, deceit, or toxic compromise. Gavin currently works as an assistant property manager for an industrial storage facility in Maryland. He lives in a small rented 1-bedroom apartment, paying off court-ordered restitution to his former investors out of every paycheck he receives. Clara left the state months ago, her reputation destroyed, her name blacklisted from every financial consulting firm in Virginia and the District of Columbia. Sometimes, people who hear fragments of this story ask me if I feel guilty for staying silent that night at the dining table. They ask how a woman can sit across from her husband, watch him sign away his financial future, and not say a single word of warning. I tell them this simple truth. True strength is not about shouting the loudest or winning every emotional argument in the room. It is about knowing exactly who you are when all the doors are closed and the audience is gone. It is about understanding that you cannot save a person who is determined to drown in their own arrogance and greed. Sometimes, the greatest and most profound revenge is not exposing the lie. It is staying silent, holding your tactical perimeter, and allowing the truth to reveal itself on its own natural timeline. I didn't destroy my ex-husband's life. His own choices, his arrogance, and his greed did that. All I did was refuse to lie down and let him use my body as a bridge to walk over his own catastrophic mistakes. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. If my journey reminded you of your own internal strength, or if you have ever had to stay quiet while waiting for justice and truth to arrive, I would love to hear your story in the comments below. Type the word Valkyrie in the comments so I know you stood with me today. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story about resilience, dignity, and the quiet power that never needs to shout to be heard. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next story.